I first started noticing it last September, while cataloging old Medici documents from a private vault in Fiesole, a job I've done hundreds of times over 25 years at the National Library of Florence. Among the yellowed contracts of the 14th to 17th centuries, a strange detail caught my eye: the handwriting. The exact same handwriting appeared in documents from 1453, 1520, 1574, and 1631. Not similar, identical. The distinct slant of the letter R, the same way of flourishing capital letters. Even the pressure of the pen was the same. At first I thought of a family tradition of calligraphy or a dating error, but ink analysis confirmed the authenticity of all the documents. They really were as old as they claimed. This meant someone had been writing these contracts for 180 years. 7 generations. Physically impossible. I checked the seals on the documents and sent a photo to a heraldry colleague in Genoa. He called back 3 days later, his voice tense. He said it wasn't an official Medici coat of arms, but a private symbol. A stylized octagon with an eye in the center, surrounded by 8 rays. And he had seen that same symbol on the seals of 11 other ancient families: Orsini, Conti, Colonna, Farnese, Aldobrandini, Breakspear, all Venetian and Roman nobility, 13th to 16th centuries. I began searching for this symbol in digital archives across Europe, and within 2 weeks, I found it on 847 documents in 23 countries, dating from 1277 to 1956. The last document was a transcript of some meeting in Basel, 1913, on the eve of the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The strangest thing happened when I accidentally found a modern document among the old folders, a bank statement from March 2023 for a transfer of 340 million euros from Banco di Santo Spirito in Rome to an account at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. The same octagon with the eye stood in place of a signature, only as a digital scan. The payment purpose: Fondazione Consiglio 13, Operational Fund. The Council of 13, Operational Fund. I broke protocol and called the bank in Rome, introducing myself as a historian researching medieval financial records. They answered coldly that this information was confidential and hung up. The next day, I was summoned by the library director, Signora Bianchi, an elegant woman in her 60s, who, over all these years, had never taken much interest in my work. Very softly, almost in a friendly way, she advised me to focus on standard cataloging and not get distracted by theoretical research that wasn't part of my duties. As I was leaving her office, I caught a glimpse of a photo on her desk in a silver frame. Her in an evening gown standing next to a man in a tuxedo. On his hand, on his ring finger, I saw a signet ring. A stylized octagon with an eye, the same symbol I had seen on documents 700 years old. I began digging deeper at night, at home, using genealogical databases of European aristocratic societies. All 12 families had maintained unbroken lines of succession from the 13th century to the present day, primarily through female lines, officially changing surnames through marriage, but the blood remained the same. Prince Carlo Massimo Lancelotti in Rome, a direct line from the Conti family. Baroness Maria Camporesi in Venice, an Orsini on her mother's side. The most terrifying thing was what I found next: the president of the European Central Bank, Fabio Alberti, the great-grandnephew of the Aldobrandinis. 47% of all central bank presidents in Europe since 1950 have genealogical ties to these 12 families. In the U.S., a quarter of the heads of the Federal Reserve over the last century. I drew a massive chart on a sheet of paper the size of a desk, connecting lines between centuries, and the picture was crystal clear. These weren't just old aristocratic families who had maintained their status. This was a systematic infiltration of the world's highest financial structures for 800 years. They started following me, The same black Mercedes with tinted windows would park near my house, near the library, near the cafe where I eat lunch. My phone started clicking during calls. The library computer began to lag. Someone was gaining remote access to it. My colleague from Genoa, the Heraldist, stopped answering calls. A week later, I learned from the news that he had died in a car accident, supposedly falling asleep at the wheel. He was 42 years old and had no health problems. Then the invitation arrived. An envelope of heavy cream paper slid under the door of my hotel room in Rome, where I had gone to photograph the facade of Banco di Santo Spirito. Inside was a card embossed in Old Italian. Fondazione Consiglio Terorthunt invites the esteemed Dr. Marco Valdani to a private audience. Venice, Palazzo Contarini del Bovolo, November 8th, 8:00 p.m. Dress code, formal. Attendance is mandatory. The signature was the octagon. On the back was a handwritten note. 4 of your predecessors did not accept the invitation. You are the 5th. Be wiser. I went to Venice. Palazzo Contarini is a small 15th century palace with a famous spiral staircase. I was met by an elderly man in a tuxedo who led me up endless stairs to the 3rd floor. A large hall, lit by candles. Around an oval black marble table sat 12 people, 6 men, 6 women, aged 40 to 80. All in evening wear. Each one wore the octagon ring. The oldest, around 80, with the face of a Venetian doge from an old portrait, said to me, "Dr. Valdani, you are very persistent. We have been watching you. You asked the right questions." For the next 2 hours, they told me everything. The council has existed since 1231, founded by 12 Venetian merchant families to stabilize the chaos of European politics. They showed me documents, meeting minutes from 1780, 1848, 1913, 1944, 1971. Every date was a turning point in world history. The French Revolution, the Spring of Nations, the creation of the Fed, Bretton Woods, the end of the gold standard. They didn't deny it. On the contrary, they confirmed it. They financed the Crusades, orchestrated the fall of Constantinople, controlled the flow of gold from the Americas, and created the first central banks. History is not chaos, Doctor. Someone must direct it. Otherwise, there is only war and darkness. They offered me the position of their historiographer, 200,000 euros a year, access to all archives, and safety for my family. They didn't state the alternative, but the next morning my wife called in tears. A black car was parked near our 8-year-old son's school, and a man had taken his photo. I signed the contract on parchment and ink, my hand shaking. Now I work in their archive near Basel, 3 floors underground, reading meeting minutes that span 8 centuries, and I realize the most terrifying thing isn't that they exist. The most terrifying thing is that their logic makes sense. That the world, perhaps, really cannot exist without shepherds. And that I've accepted this. I spent the first months working in the archive near Basel in a state of constant shock, reading documents that would rewrite the entire history of humanity if they ever went public. The vault occupies 3 underground floors beneath an ancient private library on Freie Strasse, the entrance disguised as an ordinary bookshelf in the rare editions department. You descend narrow stone stairs built back in the 13th century, when the Templars used these cellars to store gold, and you enter a world where time has stopped. The temperature is constant, 15 degrees Celsius. The humidity is controlled, and the lighting is soft, so as not to damage the ancient paper and parchment. Documents are systematized by centuries and categories: finance, politics, war, religion, science, culture. Each category consists of hundreds of folders in leather bindings embossed with the octagon. I was given a separate desk with a lamp, a magnifying glass, and white gloves for working with the oldest documents. The only rule: take nothing out, not even notes. Everything I write stays here, in my personal archive, which will also become part of the Council's collection after my death. The first document I was given to read dated back to 1231, the founding agreement of the Council, written in Latin on a crumpled piece of parchment the size of a newspaper spread. 12 signatures, 12 seals with the octagon. I recognized the names from Venetian history: Contarini, Morosini, Dandolo, Corner, Gritti, Mocenigo, the wealthiest merchant dynasties of the Serenissima, who controlled trade between East and West after the Fourth Crusade. The document is written quite bluntly, without metaphors. We, the 12 families who have seen the collapse of Constantinople and understand that emperors and kings are but temporary figures on the chessboard of history, establish this council to maintain order and direct humanity toward prosperity through the control of finance, trade, and information. We shall act from the shadows, for overt power breeds envy and rebellion, while secret power breeds stability. Following this was a detailed plan for the next 100 years. How to control the papacy through loans, how to manipulate European monarchs through debt, and how to create a network of banks that would lend money to kings for wars and then seize territories as collateral. Everything I had read in history textbooks about the medieval banking houses of Bardi, Peruzzi, and Medici, those were merely public facades, the executors of the council's decisions. The true owners of the capital never showed their faces. I began reading the minutes of the council meetings, which were held twice a year, in June and December, always in different European cities, in private palaces or castles belonging to council members. Meeting minutes from June 1347, Venice, a discussion regarding the demographic problem of Europe, overpopulation leading to famine and unrest. The decision: do not interfere with the natural spread of the plague from Asia. This will reduce the population by 1/3 and restore the balance between resources and people. I reread this paragraph 3 times, unable to believe my eyes. They knew about the Black Death before it even reached Europe. Their merchant ships had brought the first reports from Crimea in the fall of 1346, and they consciously decided not to warn anyone, not to close the ports, and not to impose quarantines. 40 million people died, half of Europe's population. In the minutes, this was referred to as natural correction. Meeting minutes from December 1492, Genoa, a discussion of Columbus's discovery of new lands. It turns out the expedition was not financed by the Spanish crown, but through intermediaries, by the council. Columbus didn't even know who the real investors were. The goal: to gain control over new sources of gold and silver before royal treasuries fill up and monarchs become independent of our loans. Meeting minutes from October 1517, Rome, a discussion of the Martin Luther affair. The council decided not to extinguish the Reformation, but rather to support it financially through German princes. The reason: the schism of Christianity will weaken the Pope's power and create new opportunities for lending to both sides of the conflict. Religious wars last a long time and require constant funding. The 30 Years' War, which devastated Germany and killed 1/3 of its population, was planned and financed as a business project. Meeting minutes from November 1913, Basel, the very ones I had found mention of in the Florence archives. 27 pages of a detailed plan for the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve System. Meeting participants, representatives of the council, plus 7 American bankers invited as junior partners: Warburg, Rockefeller, Morgan, Schiff. The minutes are written with absolute cynicism. The United States has become the richest country in the world, but its financial system is chaotic and decentralized. It is necessary to create a central bank under the guise of a government institution, but with private control. Americans trust their government, so the institution must be called federal, although it will have nothing to do with the federal government. President Wilson can be persuaded through his advisors, House and Warburg. He is an idealist who dreams of world peace. We can promise him that a stable financial system will prevent wars. 2 months after this meeting, the U.S. Congress voted to create the Fed. A year later, World War I began, which the Council financed on both sides. The Allies received loans through British and French banks, controlled by the Council, and the Germans through private Swiss and Austrian banks, also controlled by the Council. 20 million people died. National debts increased tenfold. The Council made billions and finally solidified its control over the global financial system. The most terrifying were the minutes from August 1939, Geneva, a week before the start of World War II. The heading, "The Final Solution to the European Question." I thought it would be about the Jews, but no, it was about all of Europe. The Council decided that another great war was needed, larger than the previous one, to finally destroy the remnants of the old world, monarchies, colonial empires, nation-states, and create a new system of international governance under the auspices of an organization that will replace the ineffective League of Nations. The document states explicitly, Hitler is an unstable figure, but a useful one. His aggression can be directed to the East to destroy the Soviet system, or to the West to force the Americans to intervene and become a global hegemon under our financial control. In any case, Europe will be so ruined that it will voluntarily surrender its sovereignty for the sake of peace. We will propose the European coal and steel community to them as the first step toward a federation. Everything happened exactly that way. 50 million dead. Europe in ruins. The Marshall Plan, which put Western Europe in debt to the U.S. The Bretton Woods system, which made the dollar the world currency. The UN, the IMF, the World Bank, all created at the direct instruction of the Council, all headed by people directly or indirectly connected to the 12 families. In 1951, the European coal and steel community was created, exactly according to the plan from the 1939 minutes. Today, it is the European Union with a single currency controlled by the European Central Bank, whose president is my current employer. I read these documents 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and with each passing day, my worldview crumbled and was rebuilt anew. The worst part is realizing that all of this has a logic, that the Council wasn't just manipulating history for profit. They truly believed they were making the world better, more stable, more manageable. In one of the 18th century minutes, there is a phrase I will remember forever. The masses do not know what they want. They are driven by emotions, superstitions, and fleeting passions. If left without guidance, they will destroy themselves in endless wars over resources, territories, and religions. Someone must direct history. Otherwise, there will be no history, only chaos. We are not tyrants. We are the gardeners of humanity. Sometimes at night, lying in bed next to my wife, who doesn't know where I really work or what I read every day, I think, what if they are right? What if the world really cannot exist without hidden shepherds? What if democracy, freedom, and popular sovereignty are just beautiful words, behind which stands someone making the real decisions? I no longer know the answers. I only know that my 8-year-old son goes to school alive and well, because I signed a contract in ink on parchment and swore to keep the secret of the Council of 13 until my death. After 6 months of working in the archive, I was transferred to another level of access. Modern documentation, as it was called. The third underground floor, the deepest, with an additional security system, a retinal scanner, a code lock, and a metal door as thick as a palm. This is where documents from 1945 to the present are kept. And this is where I realized that everything I had read before about the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and the World Wars was just a backstory. The Council's real power blossomed after World War II, when they created a system of international organizations that formally belong to all countries, but are effectively controlled by none. The first document I read on the third floor was dated July 1944, a detailed report on the Bretton Woods Conference, where the IMF and the World Bank were created. Official history says this was an initiative of the US and the UK. The Council's documents show a different picture. The conference was organized and financed by representatives of the Council, who worked as advisors in the delegations of all participating countries. The main architect of the system, Harry Dexter White, a U.S. Treasury official, reported to the Council every month through intermediaries. His British opponent, John Maynard Keynes, also had ties to the Council through private clubs in London. They supposedly argued publicly, but privately they were following a single plan: to create a system where all countries would be dependent on loans from international organizations, and these organizations would be controlled through the appointment of leaders. Over the last 80 years, 18 out of 24 IMF managing directors had direct or indirect ties to the 12 families. The World Bank, 13 out of 17 presidents. The Bank for International Settlements in Basel, which coordinates the activities of all the world's central banks, every single chairman of the board without exception. This is not a conspiracy theory. These are documented facts from the Council's internal memorandums, where they frankly discuss their appointments. The most shocking were the documents regarding the creation of the European Union. Meeting minutes from June 1955, Lugano, a meeting of the Council with a group of European politicians who would soon become the founding fathers of the EU. Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, Konrad Adenauer, Alcide de Gasperi. The document states quite bluntly, European integration must occur gradually, step by step, so that nations do not realize the scale of the loss of sovereignty until the moment when stopping the process is impossible. We begin with coal and steel. No one cares. Then we create an economic community. People will think only of trade. Then a political union. At this stage, there will be resistance. But economic integration will already make a breakup too expensive. The final stage is a single currency under the control of an independent central bank. After this, national governments will turn into regional administrations, implementing decisions made in Brussels and Frankfurt. I checked the dates. European Coal and Steel Community, 1951, European Economic Community, 1957, European Union, 1993, the Euro, 1999, European Central Bank, 1998. Everything went exactly according to the plan written in 1955. Jean Monnet, considered the main inspiration for European integration, met with Council representatives every 3 months in different European cities. I found receipts for his hotel payments, signed by Fondazione Consiglio Trent. Robert Schuman received an annual consultation fee in an amount that today would equal 500,000 euros. They knew who they were working for, or at least, they had a good idea. The documents regarding the Cold War were even worse because they showed that both sides were controlled from a single center. Meeting minutes from March 1947, Zurich. The Marshall Plan will ensure dominance for our American partners in Western Europe through economic dependence. Simultaneously, it is necessary to ensure control over Eastern Europe through the Soviet system, which also depends on our financial instruments. I didn't understand how this was possible. The USSR had a closed economy, a planned system, and no private banks. But further in the document, it was explained. Soviet industrialization in the 1930s was partially financed by Western loans provided through intermediaries. Technology for Soviet factories was purchased from American and German corporations, that received special licenses to trade with the USSR, licenses that the Council lobbied for through its contacts in the State Department and the Foreign Office. During the war, Lend-Lease supplied the USSR not just with weapons, but with industrial equipment that became the foundation of the post-war Soviet economy. After the war, during the most brutal phase of the Cold War, trade between the West and the East never fully stopped. There were always exceptions for certain goods and certain companies. The Council controlled these exceptions. The logic was simple. Two superpowers, locked in a confrontation, spending enormous resources on armaments, constantly in need of loans, and never becoming truly independent. The arms race was the most profitable business of the 20th century, and the Council financed both sides. I found a document from October 1962, the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world was on the brink of nuclear war. An urgent memo from a Council representative in Washington. The situation is spiraling out of control. Kennedy is ready for a military operation. It is urgent to activate our channels in the Kremlin for de-escalation. 3 days later, Khrushchev suddenly agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba. Official history says this was a diplomatic victory for Kennedy. The Council's documents show it was their operation on both sides. They pushed it to a crisis and then decided that a nuclear war was not in their interest after all, as it would destroy the system they had been building for centuries. The most terrifying discovery I made was last month, while reading documents from the last 10 years. Meeting minutes from December 2019, Davos, not the official World Economic Forum meeting where thousands gather and cameras roll, but a closed council dinner in a private chalet late at night after the forum's official closing. The attendee list: 12 council members plus 30 invited guests, heads of the world's largest tech corporations, directors of US and Chinese intelligence agencies, and 3 European prime ministers. The meeting topic: digital control and the future of money. The minutes discussed a plan to implement central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, over the next 5 years. The goal: total transparency of all financial transactions to prevent the shadow economy and tax evasion. On paper, it sounds reasonable. But then it was explained. Digital currencies would allow central banks to instantly block anyone's accounts without a court order, set expiration dates on money to force people to spend rather than save, control what people spend money on, and even set individual tax rates based on a social score. The Chinese social credit system was discussed as a successful pilot project that must be adapted for Western democracies under the guise of fighting climate change and social inequality. One council member, an Italian in his 70s, said a phrase I remember verbatim because it was recorded in the minutes. The pandemic showed how easily people give up freedoms for the sake of security. The next crisis, economic or ecological, will allow us to complete the transition to total digital control without significant resistance. The meeting took place in December 2019. A month later, the COVID-19 pandemic began. I don't know if the Council had anything to do with it. There are no documents about that in the archive, at least at my level of access. But everything that happened next, lockdowns, digital passports, cashless payments, remote control, all of it perfectly matched the plan discussed at that meeting in Davos. Now, in 2026, the European Central Bank is officially launching the digital euro. The Federal Reserve is preparing to launch the digital dollar. China has already fully transitioned to the digital yuan. Cash is gradually disappearing. And I, sitting in an archive 3 floors underground in Basel, reading the Council's meeting minutes, realize the world I grew up in, a world where at least some anonymity existed, some possibility to hide from the system, that world is ending. The next generation will live in a world of total transparency, where every purchase, Every transfer, every action leaves a digital footprint accessible to those who control the system. And the system is controlled by 12 families who have been running the world for 800 years. Sometimes I look at my son, who plays with his smartphone, unaware that this convenient device is a tool of control developed by corporations whose CEOs report to the council. And I think, could I have changed anything if I had refused their offer? If I had tried to tell the world what I learned? The answer comes quickly. No. My colleague from Genoa tried. He was declared insane before he could publish a thing. Sophia Grandin tried in 2004. She spent 12 years in a psychiatric clinic and emerged a broken woman who never told anyone anything again. The system is perfect. It has existed for 800 years precisely because it is perfectly protected from exposure. And I am just another historiographer documenting its triumph. Last week, I was granted access to the Council's genealogical archive, a separate room on the second underground floor where the family trees of the 12 families from the 13th century to the present are kept. These are not just lists of names. They are detailed dossiers on every member of every family, with photographs, educational records, career achievements, marriages, children, and even medical records. The trees are drawn on massive sheets of parchment, each the size of a wall, decorated with gold embossing and heraldic symbols. I spent 3 days there, simply walking from one tree to another, trying to grasp the scale. 794 years of continuous succession, 25 to 30 generations in each family. No breaks, no extinctions. They survived through plagues, wars, and revolutions, preserving not just their surnames, but their capital, connections, and knowledge of how real power works. The most amazing thing is how they did it technically. The primary strategy: female lines. Male lines attract attention. When one surname appears in key positions for centuries, people notice. But if your daughter marries a count or a banker or a politician, changes her name, and her son becomes a central bank president under his father's surname, no one sees the connection to your house. On the surface, it looks like a new person, a new dynasty. But the blood and the upbringing remain yours. A child is taught from infancy who they really are, whom they serve, and what role they must play in the system. I began creating a modern map of connections using data from the genealogical archive. The president of the European Central Bank, Fabio Alberti, whom I see on television making statements about EU monetary policy. His maternal great-grandmother was Eleonora Aldobrandini, who married the industrialist Giuseppe Alberti in 1898. Their great-grandson Fabio was born in 1967 in Rome, studied economics at Bocconi, worked at Goldman Sachs, then at the Italian Ministry of Finance, then became a member of the ECB Executive Board, and since 2019, its president. The official biography looks like a typical success story of a talented economist. The council documents show a different picture. Every stage of his career was planned in advance. Every appointment lobbied through the council's network of contacts in European governments and financial institutions. His candidacy for the ECB presidency was supported by all 12 council members at a meeting in June 2018, a year before the official vote. In the minutes of that meeting, it is written, "Fabio is perfect. His public image is flawless. His economic education is top tier. His political skills are excellent. And most importantly, he fully understands his role." I found the same pattern in the biographies of the heads of other central banks. The chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, his maternal grandmother was Caterina Farnese, who married an American industrialist in 1923. The governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, great-grandson of Baroness Victoria Conti, through a daughter who moved to London in the 1950s. the president of the Bundesbank, the governor of the Bank of Japan, the chairman of the Swiss National Bank. For each, I found a link to the 12 families, always through female lines, always hidden behind 3 or 4 generations of marriages and name changes. The most striking was a document titled Influence Network 2025, a vast chart compiled by council analysts showing all key positions in the global financial and political system controlled by people linked to the 12 families. Central banks, 18 of the 23 largest countries. International financial organizations, IMF, World Bank, Bank for International Settlements, European Investment Bank, all senior positions. The largest private banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, Deutsche Bank, UBS, Credit Suisse, BNP Paribas, each has at least 2 or 3 board members with links to the council. Investment giant funds like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. It's harder to trace connections there because they are corporate structures with thousands of shareholders. But the chief investment officers and strategists, again, the same surnames, the same family ties. Politics is more complicated because politicians change constantly through elections. But I found a pattern. The council does not control politicians directly. They control their advisors. Every U.S. president since the 1970s has had at least 3 economic advisors with direct or indirect links to the council. Chancellors of Germany, prime ministers of the UK, presidents of France, each had a team of advisors where our people, as they are called in internal council documents, were always found. They don't make the decisions, but they shape the agenda, prepare analytical notes, and recommend policies. The politician thinks it is his decision, but in reality, he is choosing from options presented to him by his advisors. And the advisors know which option the council needs. The most terrifying thing about this whole scheme was the realization of its scale and patience. This isn't a conspiracy organized by some secret group 50 years ago. This is a system built by 25 generations, where each generation performs its part of a long-term plan, knowing that the results will be seen by their grandchildren or great-grandchildren. The council doesn't think in years or decades, they think in centuries. The plan to create the European Union had been in development since the 1920s. The plan to replace the gold standard with a fiat currency system since the late 19th century. The plan to transition to digital currencies began being discussed at council meetings back in the 1990s, when the internet had just appeared. They aren't in a hurry because they don't need to be. They know that they or their descendants will get what they want regardless, because they have the resources, the knowledge, the connections, and most importantly, the continuity. Democratic governments change every 4 or 5 years. Politicians think about the next election. Corporations think about quarterly reports. The council thinks about the next 100 years. This gives them an incredible advantage. They can plan a crisis that will occur 20 years from now and wait patiently, gradually placing their people in the right positions, buying the right assets, and lobbying for the right laws. And when the crisis finally happens, they are already prepared to take advantage of it, while everyone else panics and doesn't understand what occurred. I sit in the council's archive and read their plans for the next 50 years. They are described in detail in a document titled Strategic Vision 2075, approved at a meeting in December 2023. By 2040, a complete transition to digital currencies and the abolition of cash in all developed countries. By 2050, the creation of a single global digital currency under the management of a reformed IMF. By 2075, completion of the global integration process through economic interdependence, making national sovereignty obsolete without formal abolition. They are not rushing. They know they will achieve this, because they always have. The hardest part of my job as the council's historiographer is not reading the documents, about the horrific things they have done over the centuries. The hardest part is living a double life. Every morning, I wake up in our apartment in Basel, have breakfast with my wife Claudia and my son Luca, walk him to school, kiss my wife goodbye, and go to work. Claudia thinks I work in the private archive of a wealthy collector who wants to systematize his collection of medieval documents. She doesn't even know the name of the organization I work for. I signed a non-disclosure agreement so strict that I cannot tell anyone, not even my wife, what I read every day. She sees that I've changed over this past year. I've become more withdrawn. I'm often lost in thought. I sleep poorly. A few times she asked if everything was all right. I told her I was just tired, that there was a lot of work, that it was monotonous. She believed me, or pretended to. The worst are the dinners with friends when they talk about politics, economics, or discuss the news. Someone says the ECB president made a wise decision regarding interest rates. Someone says cryptocurrencies are the future that will free us from bank control. Someone says democracy works because we elect our leaders. I sit in silence and drink my wine, trying not to show that I know. The ECB president is executing decisions approved by the council 3 months before the official announcement. Cryptocurrencies were developed with the participation of advisors linked to the council as an experiment before the launch of central bank digital currencies. Democracy is a beautiful facade for a system where real decisions are made in closed rooms by people whom no one elected. Sometimes I want to scream, "You don't understand. It's all an illusion." But I stay silent, because I know what happens if I speak up. Last month, I was shown the dossiers of the previous council historiographers, those who held this position before me. There have been 8 of them since 1870, when the council decided they needed someone to systematically document their activities for future generations. The first historiographer, a German professor named Friedrich Schwarz, worked from 1870 to 1923, 53 years. He died of old age at 85, peacefully in his bed in Vienna. The second, a French archivist named Jean-Baptiste Dupont, from 1923 to 1957. He died of a heart attack at 69. The third, an Italian historian named Giovanni Martello, who was mentioned during my audience, from 1957 to 1983. He wrote 3 volumes of the Council's Chronicles, lived a happy life, and died at 82 on his estate in Tuscany. The fourth, this is where the dark part begins. Antonio Vivaldi, no relation to the composer, a Venetian paleographer, worked for only a year, from 1983 to 1984. The dossier says dryly, unilaterally breached the contract, attempted to publish confidential information, died of a heart attack on February 17, 1984. He was 47. The fifth historiographer, Sofia Granda, a Swedish researcher, worked from 1985 to 2004. Breached the contract, attempted to pass documents to journalists, psychiatric diagnosis, paranoid schizophrenia. Hospitalized in a clinic in St. Gallen from 2004 to 2016, died in 2019. The sixth, a Briton named David Clark, worked from 2005 to 2015. Breached the contract, current whereabouts unknown since October 2015. The seventh, a Spaniard named Miguel Ortega, worked only 3 years, from 2016 to 2019. Breached the contract, moved to Argentina, died of alcohol poisoning in 2021. I am the eighth. While I was reading these dossiers, my council handler, an elderly man named Enrico, sat beside me and calmly explained. "You see, Marco, history shows a clear pattern. Those who accept the contract and abide by it live long and happy lives. Those who try to break the agreement do not live long, and they do not live happily. This isn't a threat. It's simply a statement of fact." The most terrifying thing in these dossiers is the realization that I am not the first to think I could change something. Antonio Vivaldi probably sat in this archive too, reading the same documents, and at some point decided, no, this is wrong. People must know the truth. Sophia Grandin probably thought she was strong, too, that she could outsmart the system, get evidence to journalists, and tell the world about the council. Both lost. The system is perfect. It has existed for 800 years precisely because it knows how to defend itself against people like Antonio and Sophia. Or people like me, if I ever decide to follow their path. I've thought about this a lot in recent weeks. I imagined copying the most important documents, hiding them, then finding a journalist from The Guardian or the New York Times, handing it all over, and the next day, the whole world finds out about the Council of 13. I imagined the scandal, the investigation, the arrests, the collapse of the system. And then I imagined a different picture. The documents I handed over would turn out to be forgeries produced by a mad conspiracy theorist. The journalist I gave them to would suddenly lose interest or get a call from his editor. I would end up in a psychiatric hospital like Sophia, or die of a heart attack like Antonio. And my wife and son, I don't even want to think about what would happen to them. Enrico once said to me over coffee in the archives cafeteria, "Marco, you seem like an intelligent man. So think logically. Suppose you copy something and pass it to someone outside. What happens next? Who will believe you? The world has thousands of conspiracy theories about Freemasons, the Illuminati, reptilians, chemtrails. The Council is just one more theory on that list. People don't believe in conspiracies on such a scale. They think the world is chaotic, that events are accidental. This is our best defense. The psychological impossibility for most people to believe that someone could control history for centuries. Even if you show them documents, they'll say, fakes. Even if an expert analysis confirms authenticity, they'll say you're misinterpreting them. You lose. You always lose. Because the system is bigger than any single person. Sometimes at night, when everyone is asleep, I open my laptop and read the news. I see the world through the eyes of ordinary people who don't know what I know. They discuss the latest elections, thinking their vote changed something. They discuss a central bank decision, thinking it's an independent institution looking out for the economy. They discuss a new technology, a new app, a new way to pay, thinking it's progress, convenience. They don't see that it's another tool of control, another step toward a world of total transparency where every action is tracked and recorded. I see the future the Council is planning, and it horrifies me. But at the same time, I understand their logic. The world is complex, chaotic, full of conflict and irrationality. Most people are incapable of long-term thinking, of planning decades ahead, of sacrificing today for a better tomorrow. Democratic governments change every few years. Every new leader cancels the predecessor's decisions. There is no continuity, no long-term strategy. Maybe the world really does need someone who sees the whole picture, who can plan for centuries, who isn't dependent on elections and popularity. Maybe the Council really is saving humanity from itself. Or maybe I'm just justifying my cowardice, my decision to stay silent for the sake of my family's safety, my capitulation to a system I cannot defeat. I don't know. The only thing I know for sure is that I am no longer that Marco Valdani who accidentally found a strange document in a Florentine archive a year ago. That Marco believed in truth, justice, and the right of people to know history. This Marco knows that truth is relative, justice is an illusion, and history is written by those who control the archives. And that sometimes the smartest decision is to keep quiet and survive, even if it means betraying everything you believed in. 3 months ago, the Council sent me on a study trip, as they call it. Enrico said that to better understand the Council's modern structure, I needed to see the key locations where it operates today. The first stop was Rome, Banco di Santo Spirito. I arrived there alone, unaccompanied, But I knew I was being watched. The council always knows where I am, what I'm doing, and whom I'm speaking to. My phone is tracked, my email is read, and every credit card purchase I make is recorded. This isn't paranoia. It's a fact they explained to me bluntly when I signed the contract. You are part of the world's greatest secret now, Marco. We have to know you aren't doing anything foolish. Banco di Santo Spirito is located in a Renaissance palazzo on Via dei Banchi Vecchi, a few minutes' walk from the Vatican. The building dates back to 1605, constructed during the era of Pope Paul V Borghese, whose coat of arms, an eagle and a dragon, still graces the main entrance. But on the third-floor cornice, almost invisible to a casual passerby, another symbol is carved. An octagon with an eye, slightly weathered by 4 centuries but still distinct. I took a few photos, acting like a tourist admiring the architecture. The bank's facade looks like a museum. Heavy oak doors with bronze handles, marble columns, and barred windows in the shape of delicate arabesques. A plaque above the entrance reads, Banco di Santo Spirito, founded 1605. Service by appointment only. I tried to go inside, but the guard at the door, an elderly man in a dark suit with impeccable manners, asked politely but firmly, "Do you have an appointment, signore?" I muttered something about being interested in the bank's history and asked if I could see the interior. He smiled a cold smile. Unfortunately, we are a private institution. An invitation is required for a visit. I stepped back, but I didn't go far. I rented a table at a cafe across the street, ordered a coffee, and sat there watching. For most of the day, nothing happened. A few clients entered and left, all elegantly dressed, all with the look of people accustomed to money and power. In the evening, at 9:37 p.m., I remembered the exact time, 3 black Mercedes with diplomatic plates pulled up to the bank. 6 men in expensive suits stepped out, all between the ages of 50 and 70. I recognized one face instantly. Giancarlo Federico, the Italian Minister of Finance, a man I'd seen on television dozens of times. The other faces were less familiar, but they all had that same look. Confidence, power, the habit of making decisions that millions of people depend on. They didn't rush. They spoke quietly among themselves, and the guard opened the door for them without question. They entered through the main entrance, but I saw the lights turn on not on the first floor, but immediately on the 4th. A special elevator, presumably. The lights on the 4th floor remained on until 3 in the morning. I sat in the cafe until it closed at midnight, then moved into the shadows of the building across the street, and just waited, staring at those illuminated windows. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the windows went dark, and 5 minutes later, the same 6 men walked out, got into their cars, and drove away. The meeting had lasted over 5 hours. The next day, Enrico, my handler, called me at the hotel. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "Marco, I heard you had a productive evening yesterday. Interesting watching the bank." I felt a chill in my stomach. They knew I was there, that I was watching. Of course they knew. Enrico continued. "What you saw last night was a working meeting of the council's Italian section. They gather once a quarter to discuss current affairs, Italy's budget, the debt crisis, the political situation. Giancarlo Federico, the finance minister you recognized, he isn't a council member, he's an invited advisor. The council invites key government officials for consultations and provides recommendations on financial policy. Officially, these meetings do not exist. Officially, Giancarlo makes decisions independently, but in reality, he knows his decisions must be aligned with the council. Otherwise, well, Italian finance ministers don't stay in their positions long if they don't cooperate." He paused, then said, "You are expected on the 4th floor of that same bank this evening. 8 p.m. Don't be late. They will show you things you won't see in the archive." I wanted to ask what exactly they would show me, but he had already hung up. I spent the rest of the day walking through Rome as if in a fog, unable to concentrate, my thoughts spinning around one thing. What is there on the 4th floor? What do they want to show me? At 8 in the evening, I approached the bank. The same guard was at the door, but this time he smiled and said, "Dr. Valdani, you are expected, 4th floor." The doors opened, and I entered a marble lobby lit by the soft glow of antique candelabras. The interior looked as though time had stopped in the 17th century. Carved wood paneling on the walls, frescoes on the ceiling, and Baroque furniture. The elevator was hidden behind one of the panels. It slid back to reveal a modern cabin with mirrors and mahogany trim. I pressed the button for 4. The doors closed silently, and the elevator ascended. When the doors opened, I found myself in a long hallway with high ceilings, lit by wall sconces. Portraits hung along the walls, men in suits from various eras, from the 17th century to the present. Under each portrait was a plaque with a name and dates. I stopped at the first one. Maffeo Barberini, 1623-1644, nephew of Pope Urban VIII, one of the bank's founders. Then, Camillo Borghese, 1650-1672, Antonio Conti, 1695-1718, Benedetto Aldobrandini, 1740-1771. I had already seen all these names in the council's archive. This was a gallery of the leaders of the Italian section spanning 4 centuries. At the end of the hallway were massive double doors with carved octagons. They opened on their own as I approached. Behind them was a large room that looked like a mixture of a museum, a library, and an operations center. Along one wall were antique cabinets filled with books and documents. Along the other were modern monitors displaying financial charts, maps, and news channels. In the center was a massive ebony table where 4 people sat. Enrico was among them. He stood up and reached out his hand. "Welcome to the heart of the Italian section of the Council of 13, Marco. This is where decisions that shape the fate of this country are made. Today, you will see how it works in real time." That evening, at Rome's Banco di Santo Spirito, I spent 4 hours watching the Italian section of the council make decisions that would become official Italian government policy the very next day. Sitting at the ebony table were 4 council members, 3 men and 1 woman, all between 60 and 80 years old. Enrico introduced them by their first names only: Alessandro, Pietro, Giovanna, Carlo. But even without surnames, I recognized some faces from the portraits in the archive. These were the descendants of the Conti, Aldobrandini, and Colonna families. Documents, glowing tablets, and financial reports lay on the table before them. On the wall behind them was a large monitor displaying charts of Italy's debt, budget deficit, and credit ratings from Moody's and S&P. Alessandro, the oldest, nearly 80, with the face of a Roman patrician, spoke slowly and precisely. "The current situation is unsatisfactory. The budget deficit exceeds 3% of GDP, violating the Maastricht criteria. Brussels is displeased. It is necessary to reform the pension system, raise the retirement age by 2 years. This will reduce expenditures by approximately 12 billion euros annually." Giovanna, an elegant woman of about 65 wearing pearls, added, "Federico understands the necessity of the reform, but fears the political fallout. The unions will organize protests. His approval rating will plummet." Pietro, the sharpest of the group, replied coldly, "His rating is not our problem. If he does not implement the reform, we will find someone who will. We have 3 potential candidates for his position, all ready to cooperate." They spoke about Italy's Minister of Finance as if he were a replaceable clerk who could be fired for not following orders. And the most terrifying part was that they had the power to do it. I had seen documents in the archive about how the council removed disobedient ministers through financial scandals, press leaks, and the loss of parliamentary support. The system works flawlessly. The next stop on my study tour was Geneva, the headquarters of the Bank for International Settlements, the very same bank where the transfer of 340 million euros I had accidentally found in the Florence archives a year ago was headed. That feels like a lifetime ago. The BIS is located in a modernist tower in the center of Geneva, octagonal in shape, an octagon, just like the council's symbol, only on the scale of a skyscraper. This is no coincidence, as Enrico explained to me. The building was designed in the 1970s by architects who received specific instructions regarding its shape. The BIS is the most important financial institution in the world that most people have never heard of. It is the bank for central banks, where central bank heads from around the world meet every month to coordinate monetary policy. Officially, the BIS belongs to the member central banks. In reality, it is controlled by the council through the appointment of key officials. I was taken to a closed meeting of the Financial Stability Board, a monthly session attended by representatives of the central banks of the 12 largest economies, plus 4 council members serving as independent expert observers. The meeting took place in a windowless oval room on the top floor of the tower, with a panoramic view of Lake Geneva. Around the table were 20 people, including the chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve, ECB President Fabio Alberti, whom I already knew from the archival documents, the governor of the Bank of England, and the president of the Bundesbank. All of them are the most powerful financiers on the planet, people whose decisions affect the lives of billions. And all of them reported to the 4 independent experts who sat to the side, only occasionally asking questions. But every question they asked changed the direction of the discussion. I sat in the corner as an observer, taking notes. They were discussing a plan for a coordinated increase in interest rates to combat inflation. One of the experts, an elderly woman named Isabella, calmly remarked, "The increase must be synchronized. Otherwise, we will create imbalances in exchange rates. I recommend the beginning of the next quarter, everyone simultaneously, by 1.5%. 3 months later, that is exactly what happened. The Fed, the ECB, the Bank of England, they all raised rates simultaneously by 1.5%. The press wrote about a coordinated response to global inflation. In reality, it was the execution of a recommendation given at a closed meeting in Geneva. The most striking visit was to London. The headquarters of the Council's British section is located not in a bank or an office building, but in an ancient mansion in Mayfair, a few minutes' walk from Buckingham Palace. The mansion has belonged to the Breakspear family since the 14th century, though it is officially listed as a private gentleman's club, one of those closed London clubs that everyone knows about, but no one can enter without an invitation. The facade is modest, without signs, just a brass plaque by the door. The October Club, members only. Estuntur, 1721. The October Club, a name with a hidden meaning, as it was explained to me. October 1066, the Battle of Hastings, when William the Conqueror subdued England. October 1347, the Black Death reached England. October 1929, the stock market crash that led to the Great Depression. October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. October has always been a month of great changes, and the club took this name as a reminder of its power over history. Inside, the atmosphere is that of a 19th century English aristocratic club. Dark wood, leather armchairs, portraits of kings and queens on the walls, and a library with rare books. But on the 3rd floor, behind an ordinary-looking bookshelf that slides away, is a modern operations center with screens, computers, and secure communication lines. Here, I met the British section of the Council, 5 members, 4 Englishmen, and 1 Scotsman. The most influential was Lord Edward Cavendish, a man in his 70s, with the perfect posture of a retired military officer and a voice accustomed to command. He showed me a document dated March 2016, 3 months before the Brexit referendum. The title, Strategy for the UK's Exit from the EU, Risks and Opportunities. The document analyzed in detail what would happen if the British voted to leave. The conclusion was clear. Brexit will create short-term economic instability, but long-term, it will strengthen our position as an independent financial center, free from Brussels regulation. We recommend not obstructing the referendum and preparing for a possible positive outcome. I asked bluntly, "Did you want Brexit?" Lord Cavendish smiled coldly. "We didn't want it, and we didn't not want it. We assessed the situation and determined that both options could be useful with the right management. Brexit happened. We made sure the consequences would be manageable." The last point of the tour, before returning to Basel, was Venice. Enrico said this would be a special visit. Venice is the birthplace of the Council. Everything began there 800 years ago, and the most important ceremonies are still held there. I arrived on a cold November evening. Fog drifted over the canals, and the city looked mystical and a bit ominous. Enrico met me at the station. We boarded a private water taxi and traveled through narrow canals to the Palazzo Contarini del Bovolo, a small but exquisite 15th-century palace with a famous external spiral staircase resembling a snail shell. Bovolo, in Venetian, means snail. The palace seemed empty. There were no tourists, only a guard at the entrance who nodded to Enrico and opened the door. We climbed the spiral staircase. It seemed endless, winding higher and higher, the stone steps worn down by 5 centuries of footsteps. Finally, a large hall on the 3rd floor, lit only by candles. Around the perimeter were portraits of the 12 founders of the Council from 1231, men in 13th-century Venetian attire, all with the same expression: intelligence, determination, and absolute self-confidence. In the center of the hall was an oval black marble table, and on it sat an ancient leather-bound volume, the same founding document from 1231 that I had read in the archive, but now the original, not a copy. 12 people sat around the table, 6 men and 6 women, ranging in age from 40 to 80. All were in evening wear, dark suits for the men and long gowns for the women. Each wore a ring with the octagon. Enrico whispered to me, "The full council. They only gather together twice a year, in June and December, always in Venice. Today is December. You are the only outsider who has ever seen the full council assembled." I felt my heart pounding. This was the moment for which I had been prepared all year. The oldest among them, the same 80-year-old man I had seen in archival photos as the head of the council, stood up and said, "Dr. Valdani, we have been watching you. You have seen our archives, our operations, our people. You now know more about the true power structure in this world than 99% of humanity. The question is, what do you intend to do with this knowledge?" That evening audience at the Palazzo Contarini lasted nearly 5 hours, but it felt as if time had stood still. The 12 council members spoke in turn, each adding their part of the story, and gradually a picture emerged before me, so grandiose and horrific that I felt my consciousness could not contain it. The oldest, whom the others called simply Maestro, he did not give a real name, spoke about the origins of the council. In 1204, Venetian merchants financed the Fourth Crusade, which, instead of Jerusalem, captured Constantinople. It was the most profitable investment in history. We looted the richest city in the world, brought back gold, relics, books, and knowledge. But most importantly, we learned a lesson. Religious wars can be manipulated for profit. Popes and kings think they serve God, but in reality, they serve those who give them money for their armies. A woman in her 60s, introduced as the Contessa, continued. Until the 13th century, Europe was chaos. Constant wars between feudal lords, between cities, between states. Trade suffered. Money was devalued. There was no stability. Our ancestors realized a system was needed that would be above kings and popes, one that would control finance, and through finance, everything else. In 1231, the 12 wealthiest Venetian families met in this very palace. It was still under construction then, but the basements were ready, and founded the council. The first principle: we never come to the surface. Kings rule, popes bless, generals fight, but we provide the money, and whoever controls the money controls everything. A man in his 50s, with the face of a modern banker, but the expression of a medieval inquisitor, spoke about the methods of control. Our main weapon is debt. We don't conquer countries with an army. We lend them money. First on reasonable terms, so they get used to it. Then more and more, until the debt becomes so large they cannot pay it back. Then we dictate the terms, what laws to pass, what policies to implement, whom to appoint to key positions. Officially, the country remains independent. In reality, it is our colony. We started with the Italian city-states in the 14th century, then the Spanish and French kings, then the British Empire. Even they borrowed from us for their wars. Now, entire continents are in debt to institutions we control. The IMF has lent hundreds of billions to Argentina, Greece, and Egypt. They will never pay it back. They will pay interest until the end of time, and that interest ensures our power. Another council member, an Italian in his 70s with the voice of a professor, added historical details. French Revolution, 1789. We financed both sides. The royal court borrowed money to suppress the uprising, the revolutionaries to buy weapons. Who won didn't matter, because the winner still ended up in debt to us. Napoleonic Wars, the same scheme on an even larger scale. The Rothschilds became our agents in this operation. They provided loans openly while we stayed in the shadows. The Rothschilds grew wealthy. We strengthened our control over European monarchies. First World War, we didn't start it, but once it began, we ensured it lasted a long time. 4 years of war meant 4 years of profits from the sale of weapons, ammunition, food, and loans to governments. 20 million died, but the system survived and became stronger. The most horrific was the monologue about World War II, delivered by an elderly woman in her late 70s, with a face that resembled a mask, impassive, cold, yet intelligent. The Versailles Treaty was intentionally harsh. We knew it would breed revanchism in Germany. We knew someone would use that revanchism to come to power. Hitler was not our choice. He was too unstable, too ideological. But when he came to power, we decided to use him. The German military industry was rebuilt through loans, a significant portion of which went through Swiss and American banks linked to us. Standard Oil supplied the fuel. IBM provided the technology for census tracking. Ford built the factories. All these corporations had ties to members of our council or their partners. We didn't support the Nazi ideology. We supported the war, because war is an opportunity to rebuild the world. 50 million died, but from the ashes, we created what we wanted: the United Nations, the Bretton Woods system, NATO, European integration. A new world order that functions to this day. I listened, and I felt sick. Physically sick from the realization that humanity's greatest tragedies were not accidents, not the results of the madness of individual dictators, but parts of a long-term business plan. Maestro, the oldest, noticed my expression and said softly, almost with sympathy, "Marco, I understand your shock. Every new historiographer goes through this. You see the monstrosity of the system and think, how can they live with this? Let me explain our logic, which you must understand, to perform your job." He stood up, walked to the window overlooking the dark Venetian canal below, and began to speak while staring into the night. Humanity is a child, Marco. A child with a massive brain but no wisdom. If you leave a child unsupervised, they'll hurt themselves. They'll stick their fingers in an outlet, fall out a window, or eat poison. The same applies to humanity. If you leave nations without guidance, they will annihilate each other in endless wars over resources, territories, and religious differences. Democracy? It's a beautiful illusion. The masses vote with their emotions, not their reason. They elect populists who promise the world and then drive their countries into crisis. Totalitarianism? That's the other extreme. One mad dictator can slaughter millions. Both systems are unstable. What is needed is a third system, a hidden meritocracy. We, the Council, were not elected by the people, but we are the most competent. For generations, we have studied history, economics, and crowd psychology. We think long-term, not in election cycles, but in centuries. We make the unpopular decisions necessary for the survival of civilization. Yes, we allow wars, but controlled, limited wars that don't destroy civilization itself. Yes, we create crises, but manageable ones that lead to reforms strengthening the system. Yes, millions suffer, but billions survive and flourish because of the stability we provide. Think about it. After World War II, the most horrific conflict in history, Europe saw its longest period of peace. 75 years without a major war between European powers. Why? Because we created a system where war became economically unviable. European integration, economic interdependence, a common currency, these are all our tools for keeping the peace. Yes, at the cost of sovereignty. But what is better? Sovereignty and war, or peace and prosperity under our leadership? He turned and looked me straight in the eye. We aren't monsters, Marco. We're realists. We do what is necessary to keep humanity from self-destructing. And if that means keeping the truth a secret, pulling the strings of world leaders, or controlling finances, we do it. Someone has to be the adult in a room full of children with nuclear weapons. After that 5-hour monologue, the maestro paused, poured himself some water from a silver pitcher, and said, "Now you know who we are and what we do. It's time to talk about you." He returned to the table and sat down, while all 12 members of the council stared at me in absolute silence. The candles flickered, their shadows dancing on the walls, intensifying the surreal feeling, as if I had stumbled into the middle of some medieval ritual. "Marco Valdani," the maestro continued, "a year ago, you stumbled upon our trail by accident. It shouldn't have happened. That bank transfer document had no business being in the Florentine Medici archives. Someone on our staff made a mistake. We knew about your discovery from day one. We watched as you dug deeper, as you pieced the whole picture together. We could have stopped you at any stage, but we chose not to. Why? Because we saw potential in you. You are methodical, meticulous, and intelligent. You understand history not as a collection of facts, but as a system of cause and effect. You are exactly who we need to document our affairs for future generations." The Contessa spoke up. "Marco, our previous historiographer, Miguel Ortega, broke his contract 3 years ago. He couldn't handle the psychological pressure. He started drinking, fell into a depression, and fled to Argentina, where he died shortly after. It was a loss for us because he only managed to document a quarter of the materials we wanted to preserve. Now, we need a new historiographer. We are offering you the role. The salary is 200,000 euros a year, plus housing, medical insurance for you and your family, and education for your son at the best schools in Europe. You will have access to the Council's full archive, 800 years of documents that no one else has ever seen. You will become the best-informed person on the planet, Marco. You will know the true history of mankind. A man in his 60s with a German accent added the practical details. Your work will consist of 2 parts. First, systematizing the existing archive. Many old documents require cataloging, translation, and analysis. Second, documenting the Council's current activities. You will attend our meetings, observe operations, and record decisions for historical purposes. Everything you write will remain in the archive for future generations of the Council. This is not public work. No one outside the Council will read your chronicles for at least the next 100 years. But you will leave a mark on history. Your child, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will one day be able to read your work and be proud of you. The older woman, the same one who spoke about Bund, added more gently, Marco, I understand your doubts. You're thinking, how can I serve a system that allows such terrible things? But look at it differently. You aren't serving evil. You are serving the truth. You are documenting history as it really is, without romanticizing it, without propaganda. The history taught at universities is just fairy tales for children. You will be writing the real history for adults. It is a noble mission. The maestro concluded, We are giving you 48 hours to think it over. Go back to Basel, talk to your wife. No, don't tell her the truth, but feel out what is important to you. Then decide. If you accept the offer, call Enrico. He will arrange everything. If you refuse, he didn't finish the sentence. He just spread his hands. The Contessa added, her voice steel under velvet softness. Marco, in the last 80 years, 8 people have held the position of council historiographer. 4 accepted the terms and lived long, prosperous lives. 4 refused or tried to break the agreement. Antonio Vivaldi died of a heart attack a month after refusing. He was 47 and a healthy man. Sophia Grandin tried to leak documents to journalists. She spent 12 years in a psychiatric clinic and left as a shell of a person. David Clark disappeared without a trace in 2015. Miguel Ortega fled to Argentina and died of alcohol poisoning. Do you see the pattern? I left the Palazzo Contarini at 2 in the morning. The fog over the canals was so thick I could barely see 6 feet in front of me. My phone was ringing. It was Claudia. I answered, trying to steady my voice. Marco, where are you? I'm worried. I replied. At the conference, honey. It ran late. I'm just heading back to the hotel. She was silent for a moment, then said quietly, fear evident in her voice. Marco, something strange happened today. I was picking up Luca from school, and there was a black car with tinted windows by the gate. A man got out, walked up to Luca, smiled, and asked, What a handsome boy. What's his name? I grabbed Luca's hand and walked away quickly, but the man managed to take a picture with his phone. Of Luca. Our son, Marco. What is going on? Why is someone taking pictures of our child? A chill shot through me that had nothing to do with the fog. I understood instantly. It wasn't an accident or a coincidence. It was a message from the council, a message that was crystal clear. We can get to your son at any time. Choose wisely. I told Claudia in a trembling voice, Honey, it's nothing. Probably just a tourist who made a mistake. I'll be home tomorrow, and everything will be fine. Give Luca a kiss for me. I hung up and leaned against the wall of the old building, feeling my legs give way. They touched my son, my child. This was no longer about me, my principles, or truth versus lies. This was about Luca's life. For the next 48 hours, I didn't sleep. I sat in my hotel room, staring out the window at the dark Venetian waters and thinking. I weighed the scenarios. Scenario 1. I refuse and try to run with my family. To where? What corner of the world can you hide in from an organization that has existed for 800 years and has people in every country? Scenario 2. I accept the offer and become part of a system I hate, but Luca stays alive and safe. Scenario 3. I accept the offer but secretly copy the documents, waiting for the right moment to expose the council. But how? Sofia Grandin tried and ended up in a madhouse. Antonio Vivaldi tried and died of a heart attack. The system is perfect, protected by centuries of experience in hiding the truth. I thought about Luca, about how he laughs when I throw him into the air, about how he hugs me before bed and says, "Daddy, I love you," about the fact that he's 8 years old and has his whole life ahead of him. And I realized I don't have a choice. I never did. After 46 hours, I called Enrico. I said one word: I accept. He replied calmly, as if he expected it. Wise decision, Marco. Come to Basel tomorrow. We'll sign the contract. As for your family, that car won't be showing up at the school anymore. We protect our own. I hung up and cried for the first time in years, not out of relief, not out of fear, but out of a sense of total surrender. From the realization that I had just sold my soul, my convictions, and everything I believed in for the safety of my child. And the worst part was knowing I would do it all over again, without hesitation. That the council knew this from the very beginning. That they always know exactly where your breaking point is. And that a system lasting 800 years doesn't make mistakes in choosing its people. They didn't choose me because I was the best historian. They chose me because they knew I love my son more than the truth. And they were absolutely right. The contract was signed in the same room of the Palazzo Contarini, 3 days after my phone call with Enrico. The 12 members of the council sat at the table. I stood before them. On the tabletop lay a document. It wasn't a modern legal contract, but a handmade parchment written in calligraphic script in Latin and Italian, with seals at the bottom, octagons of dark red wax. The maestro read the main terms aloud, his voice echoing through the silent room. Marco Valdani, archivist from Florence, accepts the position of historiographer for the Fondazione Consiglio for life, or until the council decides otherwise. He shall receive an annual salary of 200,000 euros, housing, and medical insurance for himself and his family. He shall receive unlimited access to the council's archives and the right to attend meetings as an observer. In exchange, he commits, first, to absolute secrecy regarding everything he sees and hears. Second, to not copying any documents outside the archive. Third, to having no contact with the media, publishers, or any persons who could disseminate information about the council. Fourth, to not leaving Swiss territory without the council's permission. Violation of any of these terms will lead to immediate termination of the contract and, he paused, looking me in the eye, appropriate consequences. I said the only sentence I had managed to put together over those 3 days. I accept all conditions under one additional proviso. My wife and son are never again, under any circumstances, to be mentioned in your conversations or used as a tool to pressure me. Their safety must be guaranteed, regardless of my actions. The maestro smiled subtly. That condition is already inherent in the contract, Marco. We protect the families of our employees. If you keep the agreement, your family is safe. Even if you break it, we won't touch your loved ones, only you. We are not monsters. I was handed a pen, a genuine goose quill like in the Middle Ages, and an inkwell. I took them with a trembling hand, dipped it in the ink, and signed the bottom of the document next to the 12 seals of the council. The signature came out crooked and uneven. The maestro took a seal, heated the wax over a candle, dripped it onto the parchment by my name, and pressed down. An octagon with an eye appeared. It is done. Welcome to the Council of 13, Dr. Valdani. You have just become part of the oldest organization in the world. The following week, I officially moved to Basel. I told Claudia I had landed a prestigious position at a private historical foundation. Great pay, a convenient schedule, and plenty of research opportunities. She was happy. In Florence, we had been renting an apartment. An archivist's salary was modest, and now we could afford much more. The council assigned us a spacious apartment in a quiet district of Basel, a 30-minute walk from the archive, with a good school for Luca nearby. Claudia found a job as an Italian instructor at a language school. From the outside, our life looked perfect. Inside, I felt myself dying a little bit every day. Every morning I woke up, had breakfast with my family, kissed my wife and son, went to work, and descended into the vaults beneath an old library, where 800 years of secrets, lies, and manipulation lay resting. For the first few months, I read like a man possessed. 10, 12 hours a day, devouring documents, taking notes, building timelines. The minutes of council meetings from 1231 to 2024, over 2,000 sessions, each described in detail. Financial reports showing the flow of money through the centuries, how capital was accumulated, invested, multiplied, and how it changed forms, but always remained under the control of the 12 families. Correspondence with kings, popes, presidents, and prime ministers. Thousands of letters in which the world's rulers asked for advice, money, and the support of people whose names history never remembered. Plans for future operations, the Strategic Vision 2075. I mentioned before was just the tip of the iceberg. I found documents with plans for the next 200 years, up to the year 2225. The Council plans to introduce a single global currency by 2095, a common world government by 2150, and full control over population reproduction through genetic technology and parental licensing by 2180. All of it written dispassionately, like a corporate business plan, with numbers, charts, and implementation stages. After 6 months of work, I met Kenji Tanaka, the council's other presiding historiographer, a Japanese man in his 50s who had been working here for 15 years. He was appointed after Miguel Ortega's flight to Argentina. Kenji lived in Basel permanently, married to a Swiss woman, with 2 teenage children. Perfect integration. We met for lunch once a week at a small Japanese restaurant near the archive, one of the few places where I could speak openly, because Kenji was the only person in my life who knew the truth. At first we talked about work, analyzing documents, clarifying details, and he shared his experience in interpreting the most difficult texts. Over time, the conversations grew deeper. Once, over green tea, Kenji said to me, "Marco, I see your suffering. I see it in your eyes. I suffered once too. The first 3 years were hell. Every day I thought about what I was reading, and I felt disgusted with myself for serving this system. Then something changed. I realized the council isn't evil. The council is an inevitability." I looked at him in surprise. He continued calmly. "Think logically, Marco. Humanity has existed for what? 200,000 years? Civilization for 6,000? And how much of that time have people spent in war, violence, and chaos? Most of it. The only periods of relative peace and prosperity are those where a strong, centralized power existed. The Roman Empire, 2 centuries of Pax Romana. The Chinese dynasties, periods of stability when the emperor controlled everything. Europe after 1945, the longest peace, because the council created a system where war doesn't pay. Democracy? Look at it soberly. Populists come to power promising the impossible, ruin the economy, leave, and the next ones do the same. The masses vote with their emotions. Trump in the US, Brexit in Britain, left-wing populists in South America, right-wingers in Europe. They all promise simple solutions to complex problems. Who prevents a total collapse? The central banks, the IMF, financial institutions, all controlled by the Council. They make unpopular but necessary decisions. They raise interest rates, implement austerity measures, and save economies from crashing. Yes, people suffer in the short term, but the system survives in the long run. I listened to Kenji, and the most terrifying part was the realization that he was right. Not entirely, not on every point, but on something very fundamental. I spent a year reading history from the inside, seeing mechanisms that no one else perceives, and I realized the world truly cannot function without some form of hidden management. The complexity of the modern economy, finance, and technology is too great for the average voter to make informed decisions. People vote for those who promise to simultaneously cut taxes and increase spending, which is mathematically impossible, but popular. They vote to leave international alliances without understanding the economic consequences. They vote against vaccines, against science, and for conspiracy theories. If given total power, they would destroy the system within a single generation. That is why someone must steer from the shadows. Not a dictatorship, that is too obvious and breeds resistance, but a soft, almost imperceptible guidance through finance, placing the right people in the right positions and controlling information. That is exactly what the Council does. And the more I read, the more it hit me that they might actually be saving humanity from itself. In the evening, I would return home, hug Luca, and listen to his stories about school, his friends, and what he learned that day. He is happy, safe, and growing up in a stable world where he has food, education, and medical care. In a world that the Council helped create and has maintained for 80 years. Without the Council, perhaps there would have been a nuclear war in 1962. Maybe the 2008 financial crash would have turned into a new 1929 with millions starving. Maybe the COVID pandemic would have led to total chaos instead of a coordinated, albeit authoritarian response. I don't know. I don't know anything for sure anymore. Last month, I began writing the official chronicle of the Council, the task I was hired for. I sat at an ancient oak desk in a private room in the archive, opened a blank leather-bound notebook, took the pen, and wrote the first sentence. The history of the Council of 13 is the story of how 12 families saved humanity from itself. I looked at what I had written, my handwriting, my words. But were they my thoughts? I'm not sure of that anymore. I placed a period. I closed the notebook. I looked out the window. The sun was setting over Basel, staining the sky a blood-red color. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my face, thin, aged, with dark circles under my eyes. I didn't recognize myself. A year ago, I was Marco Valdani, an archivist who believed in truth and justice. Now, I am the historiographer of the Council of 13, a man who knows too much and can do nothing about it, a man who sold his soul for his son's safety, a man who is starting to justify the very thing he once hated. The most terrifying thing isn't that the Council exists. The most terrifying thing is that they might be right. And I have accepted it.